Well, good afternoon, fellow Eastern Acers. It is my pleasure to kick off our breakout sessions today. And before I introduce our wonderful presenter and her topic for today, Inclusion Matters, 8 Best Practices for Inclusive Leadership, I do want to go ahead and give you some of the ground rules, the house rules that are going to help you and make this an enjoyable experience. So if you take a look where your chat is and where many of you are chatting right now, please continue. That's a place where you can converse with one another, give props, thumbs up. But also if there's any files that Simone would want to share, she would drop them in there. So that's an opportunity. If you look next to chat, it says polls. If there are any polls through any of the presentations that you attend, you would see a little green dot next to the word polls that would let you know there was an active poll for you to take. You would then take that poll and then submit your answers. You will see the Q&A. That's what we're asking for you to use when you have those questions. So rather than putting your questions in the chat box, please put your questions in the Q&A. At the end of Simone's presentation, I am going to facilitate those questions for her. And then one other item I want to mention is Simone's presentation is SHRM accredited. So if you are seeking those SHRM credits, her last slide today will have for you the information you need to access that and submit it for SHRM credit. So I did want to make you aware of that. So without further ado, I would like to now introduce Simone Morris, our speaker. So Simone Morris is an award-winning diversity and inclusion leader who's been recognized by Diversity Best Practices, Diversity MBA, and her former employer. Her background includes over 2 decades in corporate America spanning information technology, commercial strategy, and human resources. She has extensive leadership experience and holds an MBA from the University of Connecticut. Her articles have been published in Profiles for Diversity Journal magazine, Glassdoor blog, LeaderCast, AMA Women's Leadership blog, Smart Recruiters, SocialHire.com, and more. She is also the published author of The Power of Earning Your Career, Winning Strategies, Tools, and Tips for Creating Your Desired Career and Achievement Unlocked. Strategies to Set Goals and Manifest Them. So it is my absolute pleasure to now turn this presentation over to Simone to give us some awesome knowledge in terms of inclusion, mattering, and the 7 best practices for inclusive leadership. Go ahead, Simone.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so looking forward to this presentation because I have been talking about inclusive leadership for a long time now, and so we are going to have a good conversation about best practices around inclusive leadership and allow you the opportunity, like Kristen said, to answer some questions at the end of the session, but really looking forward to our time together. Now, as you heard the bio about my company has been around since about 2015, and the primary focus for us is really on developing human growth. And we do so in 2 ways. One way is around career expertise, and the other way is around providing solutions for inclusive leadership. And that's the arm that I'm going to be talking to you about today. Now, the state of diversity and inclusion in 2020. Let me just say, wow, there is a lot going on in 2020. Who would ever have thought we would be experiencing what we're experiencing today in 2020, even after COVID-19, even though that's still going on? What's happening with diversity and inclusion is in 2020 is something to pay attention to because it really is a tipping point. What do I mean by that? Well, I think perhaps you might have to live under a rock if you don't know the name George Floyd, or perhaps you don't watch the news. Whatever it is, George Floyd is the tipping point in 2020 for racial equity. His name is not the only name, but his name is the one that has just pushed us over the top in the Black community in terms of asking for more inclusion, asking for more racial equity. But that's not it alone. It was George Floyd. It was Christian Cooper. You may recall that name. It was Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, and so Ahmaud Arbery. I can go on and on with the names of names that should give us pause and help us to understand that there is truly still a challenge when it comes to inclusion, not only in your organizations, but also in the world at large. There is an inclusion challenge. So I'm happy that you're here today, wanting to hear about best practices and what you can do in this space to create more inclusive cultures. So I just listed off some names, but let me also talk about what's going on. So the names that I rattled off before really had to do with the Black Lives Matter. Everything is a hashtag today. If you think about it, when something happens, there is immediately a hashtag. You don't have to head over to Twitter. You just hear about it. So there is Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, and when things happen, like what happened in Orlando in that nightclub that was targeted to gay and lesbian people or against them, then there came the Orlando Strong hashtag. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with Me Too. I don't even need to talk about it. I just need to say Me Too. And most of us can conjure up images about what that really meant, who was involved, and how cataclysmic that was for gender equality and changes that happened as a result of that hashtag. So many hashtags going on. Language is different. You're hearing things. You're hearing a lot of words like white fragility. That there's a book that Dr. Robin DiAngelo has written called White Fragility. And so that is at the forefront now in terms of language that we're wrestling with in the inclusive leadership space. White privilege. How much do people know about it or acknowledge that they have privilege based on the color of their skin? So that's something that's dancing in this stew, if you will, that I call the diversity and inclusion stew. BIPOC for Black, Indigenous people, and people of color. That's another word. Ageism, etc. The point is, there is so much going on in this space that you have to pause and take notice that inclusion is here to stay, not just diversity and diversifying your workforce, but also creating inclusive cultures where people feel welcomed and appreciated and able to show up and contribute for better productivity, better engagement, etc., better competitive advantage for companies. I say all that to say, wow, inclusion is hard work. Understand that you are going to bumble and stumble on this inclusion journey. You're going to get it right sometimes, and you're going to mess up at other times. Just understand that this is not easy work. It is hard work, and it's going to require you to be self-aware, to be courageous, not only in your language, but in the actions that you take to embrace differences, even if you do not understand the differences that are on the table. You have to be intentional about inclusive leadership, inclusion in general. And, the thing to do is to give yourself grace. Forgive yourself if you inadvertently made someone feel excluded. Forgive yourself and try again the next day to be inclusive. That's a Simone Morris quote. Now, according to SHRM, they define inclusion as all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. They have equal access to opportunities and resources, and they can contribute fully to organization success. I dare say that definition is there's nothing wrong with it. It makes sense. It makes sense to all of us, but in real life, we still have exclusion challenges. Now, when I think about inclusion, I think about these things. It's the opposite of exclusion. Some of you may have heard of Verna Myers, who did a TED Talk many years ago that has millions of views, and she's actually now the Chief Diversity Officer for Netflix. And she says that diversity is being asked to the dance, and inclusion is being invited to dance. And that, phrase just took off. Many people use that phrase today because it just conjures up vivid images that you can ask people, you can invite people to the party, but if you don't ask them to dance, they may not have a good time. And so that goes back to that SHRM definition of really allowing people to contribute to the organization's success, to participate, to feel like they are a part of. Um, you have to take a risk. You have to do several things to be inclusive. So yes, we have that nice SHRM definition, and most of us think included, be a part of, but it is so much more than that. How do you define inclusion? Go ahead and write it in the chat, if you will. How do you define inclusion? What is your definition? I'm always interested because when I ask my students to define diversity and inclusion, no doubt there are many different answers, and it really proves the point that we all have varying perspectives about what diversity and what inclusion should be. How many of you have ever felt excluded? Let's go ahead and do a quick poll. How many of you have ever felt excluded? Let's go ahead and take a look at the poll. Go ahead and vote. How many of you have ever felt excluded? And I want you to just think about that. Most people, very quickly, I'm seeing the numbers jump. Most people have at one point or another felt excluded, even in family life. So it doesn't just have to be from an organization standpoint. It could be in your family. It could be in a social setting. I know that I've gone to networking events where there's a closed circle. And I talk about this in one of the other presentations I do about inclusive networking. There's a closed circle that signals to me, you are not invited to dance here. So it could be inadvertently that there are signals around exclusion, but I am well pleased. Oh, there's one person who said that they have never felt excluded. Kudos to you for the journey that you're on. But most people have felt excluded at one point or another. And I think that you would agree that your performance changed when you felt excluded. And this just drives home the point that really inclusive leadership is necessary. So if it's so simple, why don't we just include others? If it's so simple, why don't we just do it? Well, here's one idea. One idea is that we believe we know the right way to do things. Now let's think about how we were brought up. How we were raised has an impact on how we operate as individuals. So your parents have taught you this is the right way, this is the wrong way. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm always course correcting and telling her, no, this is the right way to do it. So she's growing up thinking this is the right way, this is the wrong way. And the same thing with me as an individual, and same thing with you all. You have been taught the right way. So when someone bucks up against the status quo and say, this is not the way you do it, you're like, no, this is the right way to do it. So we are challenged with unlearning what we have learned as children, knowing the right way. So we may have learned something and someone comes up with another way of doing it, and it's challenging to say, okay, my way that I've been doing it is wrong. So we know the right way, and that's one of the challenges we face. The other thing is baggage. Our life experiences cause us to carry around baggage. That means that I've had an interaction with someone, and this has made me feel this type of way with this group of people, right? So you carry around baggage. Your brain stores the information that you have based on your life experiences. And so when you are confronted with these different experiences, you're calling on that resource to help you make a decision on how you behave. You believe what you see. Now, think about this. In the first 7 seconds, we form an impression about the people that we meet. The first 7 seconds, that's all. And that impression doesn't have to be correct. Let's think about it. This morning, as I was thinking about the presentation, I was actually thinking about Trayvon Martin and the perception and message about the hoodie and what that sent. So, based on that database of information that I talked about before, where an experience you have with someone in a hoodie who is Black, and this is what this must mean, you have to unlearn that and you have to challenge your assumptions. You have to challenge what you see. Even in the interviewing process, you may not see a true picture, but if you see someone and they are not nicely dressed and their language is not the right way that you have learned the right way, you may be challenged with taking them seriously for the role that you are actually going trying to fill. So I'm here suggesting to you that believing what you see immediately could be a part of the issue around being inclusive. So let's dive into what you came here for today, and that's those 8 best practices. Let's have a chat about those, if you will. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to talk about these 8 practices that have to do with how we learn, have to do with how we listen to others. We'll talk about vendor diversity a bit and how you can take advantage of that and being inclusive. We'll also talk about some opportunities for benchmarking and looking at people who are doing it well. We will talk about language that we use, and as well as risk. Risk is something that is important to consider. And then we'll talk about walking the talk, as well as technology as an opportunity for inclusive leadership. Continuous learning. This is a best practice. I bring it up because if your organization, if your association has one class on diversity and inclusion, and a box has been checked that you have taught your employees and your organization how to be inclusive leader, then you have a challenge. Think about it. If you go and you take a class and then you don't use the information and you don't have further training, how effective are you? I'm actually thinking about my statistics class right now, and some of the things, histograms, the things that I learned during that time and how I felt. How am I going to use this? And if I didn't say trained up on the topic, it just went out of mind, right? So when it comes to diversity and inclusion, one of the best practices I want you to consider is that you have to stay in a mode of continuous learning. Your learning and development teams in your organization, or you as an individual, have to allow some professional development that includes learning more about diversity and inclusion. You have to invest in continuous learning. Here are some opportunities for you to consider. As an individual, you want to commit to getting culturally competent, getting additional education. What does that mean? It means reading. It means being intentional about your choices of food consumption, diversifying the types of food that you eat, diversifying your vacations that you take. What this is doing is it's building your cultural awareness and cultural competency and appreciation for different cultures by exposing you to differences, where you learn to dance with the differences that you come into contact with. So I would say commit to cultural education. Another thing is think about the conferences that you attend, whether as a speaker or as an attendee or as a panelist. Put yourself out there and don't just go after conferences that feel good to you, or you know that you'll be a good fit for the culture. There is a piece of this that has to do with being okay with being uncomfortable. And so putting yourself in scenarios that are going to drive more growth, that is an opportunity for continuous learning in this space. So I would say take a look at online learning opportunities for cultural education. Look at your professional development plan, whether you have a performance review and you have to ask for education. Think about what you're asking for. Are you just asking for things that make sense to you and are not stretching you and growing you in this cultural competency space? Well, that's an opportunity. And think about your networking. Networking is huge. Think about how you show up on the LinkedIn platform and how inclusive you really are. And think about how you network. Who are the people that you're having virtual coffee chats with, or who are the organizations, associations that you are associating yourself with? These are all learning opportunities that, as an individual, you can take advantage of. I have strong thoughts about the individual and how the individual can meet the organization. And I'll briefly say one of the things I've developed is a inclusion boot camp that focuses on building the individual up to meet the organization. And so let's talk about the organization for a moment. So the organization can create space for everybody to learn, but they also need to put their money where their mouth is. They need to provide dollars, budget dollars for additional training. They need to provide different types of training. Maybe people learn better online or in person, or game version. They need to think about the technology and just think very differently about the offerings of this training that they are providing, and how they are walking the talk as an inclusive culture. So commit to cultural education, make this a part of the learning and development strategy. So both the organization and the individual, they both have work to do in order to truly have an inclusive environment. Focus groups. Leveraging focus groups is a good idea. Your internal focus group. What this means is start listening to your employees. Listen to what they're telling you. Some organizations have what we call business resource groups, or affinity groups, or employee resource groups. These are all groups that are sliced and diced according to the different diversity dimensions. So, for example, you could have a LGBTQ group. You could have a women's group, a Black group, Latina, Hispanic group, a disability or physical ability or abilities group, excuse me. So there are many different types of groups that you can have where you can learn cultural education from these groups. And so I suggest to you that this is an opportunity to take advantage of these groups that are in the organization. But if you don't have these affinity groups, you can still listen to your employees, listen to them, and provide space to ask them questions about what they think about the culture of the organization. Don't make assumptions on what they think, because the world at large is changing. And remember, I talked about believing what you see. So you could see a white person and believe that they are of a certain stance because of the color of their skin, but their family makeup, where they live, the people that they associate with could be very diverse. So their perspective is very different. So you want to make space to listen and allow different voices to come in and form your strategy of what it is you want to do. Use engagement surveys. Be sure to ask specific questions around inclusion in the engagement survey so that you're measuring how it is being received. Listen to what's being said. If you want to do an anonymous suggestion box, I know that some people with the engagement surveys, they're a little nervous because based on the demographics that some companies collect, they figure that it can be traced. The feedback that I provide can be traced. So I'm not going to be completely authentic with my feedback. So have an opportunity for suggestion box or anonymous feedback where you can learn about the culture. Right now, with the challenges around racial equity, a lot of organizations are doing listening sessions where they're listening to learn. I suggest to you that this is a best practice in the inclusive leadership space where you're listening to learn. So that is another opportunity. The other thing that I want to talk about is it is not just about how diverse your employee base is. So you can be concerned about diversifying your employees, but also think about diversifying the clients. The clients that use your products and services could be very diverse. And what opportunities are you creating for them to feel included as a customer? It's also about the vendors that you deal with. That's an opportunity to look. If you're looking for ways to be inclusive in your association, your college, your organization, look at different areas. First of all, look at your community. How diverse is it? And how much am I inviting this diverse community to participate, whether it's at the leadership level or innovation or whatever it is? How am I creating the opportunity for inclusion? How am I fostering inclusive opportunities in my community? So look at that, but again, look at your community, look at the customers, look at the vendors that you work with. And this is what I want to talk to you. Supplier diversity or vendor diversity is very big right now. Organizations are looking at how they work with different minority vendors. So it could be from a standpoint, I have on the screen, if you take a look, these different organizations that you want to consider. So if you want to work with more women in your organization, you might look at an organization called WBENC, Women's Business Enterprise National Council. They certify women-owned businesses, and they have opportunities to partner with organizations to create opportunities to educate these women businesses and to also hire these women businesses. There are veterans organization, the National Veterans Business Development Council, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. These are all different organizations that you can tap in to help you be more inclusive with the suppliers that you purchase from. So it's not just about purchasing from the same people. I read just a few days ago that SurveyMonkey has put in a process where they're going to be asking the people, their partners, to show them that they are actually working with diverse vendors. And I come from a consumer products goods background. That's one of the areas that I've worked with. And I remember that in the marketing space, they were asking agencies to prove that they had diverse vendors that they were working with. I suggest to you, you're going to see a lot more of that now because the receipts are being called. And what I mean by that is people are scrutinizing organizations. Buying decisions are very different. Your values, your mission, the fact that you walk the talk on this inclusion journey is going to be challenged. So it's very important that you start to connect the dots and you start to really change your narrative, change your authentic narrative so that you are actually walking the talk on this inclusion journey. So this is an opportunity for you to be best practice, for you to take a stand with your suppliers. So if you're challenged with, your community and creating inclusion opportunities, this could be one of those wins where you start with supplier diversity and creating more opportunities to bring diverse vendors into your organization and a process for working with them and educating those vendors. Benchmark leaders. This is really a great opportunity to learn. If you are trying to figure out what to do, there are plenty of companies that are doing it right and you can learn from. I suggest to you as a best practice, you can take advantage of some of the benchmarking surveys that are out there. Now, this is just a few of them, but there are a ton of other surveys that you can consider. Diversity Inc. Top 50 has been around for a number of years, and what they're doing is they have a rigorous process to look at organizations and what they're doing, and if they are truly walking the talk in this diversity and inclusion space. So I would suggest to you, if you need ideas on what you can do in your organization, one of the things to do is look at Diversity Inc. Top 50 survey. They have the current 2020 survey out, so you can find out which companies are doing it well. That's one opportunity. Things like Fortune, Great Places to Work, those are other surveys that you could look at. Working Mother or National Association of Female Executives. That is another opportunity to look at in terms of companies who are dancing well with that diversity dimension, if you will. Best places for multicultural women. That's another conference. I've spoken at that conference, and what a wonderful opportunity to just listen. We talked about that as a strategy, to listen to what is being said from this community and where there are gaps. So, as I think about it, I talked about individual learning and participation from the organization as well. You could be a sponsor for different types of conferences. So, in terms of putting yourself out there as an inclusive leader, or be seen as walking the talk on the inclusion journey, you could sponsor a diversity and inclusion themed conference. So, this best practices for multicultural women, you could send employees to the conference. You could do a panel, pick leaders from your organization to speak at the conference, so they also get to learn from the community in that conference. And there are many conferences. There's a conference that I was at earlier this year, Black Enterprise Women of Power Summit. I said to myself, if I had known about this 15 years ago, because it's been around for 15 years, I would have taken advantage of a conference like that when I was in corporate, because I just didn't know it's a safe place for Black women to have conversations and talk about leadership. What a wonderful opportunity for organizations to show up and support this type of initiative. And it is, in fact, a win-win on the inclusion journey, because not only are your employees getting an opportunity to get educated, you're also getting an opportunity to get insights back into your organization that can drive competitive advantage, innovation, etc. So those are opportunities. Human Rights Campaign is really around the gay and lesbian LGBTQIA experience. They vet companies, and they give them a rating. A lot of companies strive to get 100 on this HRC survey, and they're doing their due diligence to see how the LGBT community is being promoted, the marketing to that community, et cetera, et cetera. So these are places that you can look for opportunities on your inclusion journey. And I'd say just take notes, go on a listening, learning session, and just look at some of these surveys. And the nice thing about these surveys is that they provide, if you will, they provide information on what companies are doing to rank on these surveys. So read some of the comments, look at some of the videos. I know Diversity Inc. has videos where maybe the CEO spoke, or someone from the company spoke about receiving the award, and they gave some insights into what the organization was doing. It's an opportunity to learn. And remember, I said this is an inclusion journey, so you're not going to get it all at once. And by the way, you can get it and stumble because of some misstep. And it's not just about what the organization does. Think about it. The organization is made up of many people. So the organization can be walking the talk, but then there can be individuals in the organization that are not walking the talk. And what's coming to mind for me right now is ABC. They had a situation where they had a white woman who was the chief diversity officer. And she's in this role, but she was undermining opportunities to thrive in that diversity and inclusion space, and blocking things that the organization or individuals were trying to do in service of inclusion. And so while ABC could be looking good with what they're doing about inclusion, this all came to a head recently after the George Floyd movement, where people are just being truthful or finding their voice now and sharing their experiences in organizations and associations, et cetera, what's actually happening, even in colleges, what's happening. So lots of opportunity here for you to take advantage of the benchmarking surveys to really learn a bit more. Here's what I want to say to you as you think about the benchmarking surveys. You, for example, Diversity Inc., you can go and look at the top 50 companies for diversity. You can also, they slice and dice the data, so you can look at the top companies for ERGs or employee resource groups or affinity groups I talked about before. If you're thinking about bringing a ERG into your organization, maybe you want to take a look at these companies like AT&T, et cetera, to see what they're doing and learn from them as you figure out your strategy. So I like that they slice and dice the data where you can look at the top companies and utilities, what they're doing for D&I. Now, what I want to say to you is you have to take the diversity surveys with a grain of salt. And what I mean by that, again, going back to ABC, is that you as an organization could be doing it well. So in this example, Ernst & Young has been on the list for a number of years. They are seen as one of the leaders in this space in terms of policies and practices that they have for their organization. But they got a hiccup. They got a bumble and stumble on this journey. They had a training session, and this was not too long ago. They had a training session where the women were being instructed on how to dress and act nicely around men. And just think about this. The Me Too movement, this is a huge issue. And you can see that it can cost the organization a lot of money. So I say all that to say, you can admire others that are doing it well, but understand that everybody is challenged with being inclusive and that it is a journey. So the bottom line is I want you to observe and learn from others. I also want you to invest in your journey and celebrate, pat yourself on the back. If you're doing it well, pat yourself on the back, but know that you've got more work to do. And if you've stumbled, still give yourself grace and say, you know what, I don't fully have this figured out right now, but I'm going to keep trying. I would like to invite you all to nix exclusion language and to be self-aware to recognize when you are using exclusion language. What I mean by that is I hear people telling me whether I'm a vendor at an expo, a conference, or I network, and people tell me, I had a conversation with a law firm recently, and they were telling me how hard it is to find lawyers to work at this company and based on where they're located. Check yourself on the language that you're using because it needs to match up. If you're saying I can't find diverse talent, challenge yourself with, well, where are you looking to find diverse talent? And how open are you to suspend judgment on the talent that comes to your front door? In my inclusion bootcamp course that I teach, I have the participants look at a job description, and we talked about, do you really need all these things to do the job? For example, putting down that to be an administrative assistant that you need to have a bachelor's degree is one of those exclusion moves, because you really don't need to have a bachelor's degree to be a good administrative assistant. Think about it. There are many people who have college degrees and are doing different types of jobs, but do you really need that? But that is a requirement. So right there, you're signaling exclusion. Perhaps unintentionally, you're trying to make sure you have the cream of the crop, but that in itself is a challenge in terms of exclusion. So think about, what you're saying and what you're doing. Also, check your behaviors. And we talk about unconscious bias and some of the training that's done. What are you unconsciously doing that's signaling exclusion? I had a client that I was working with, and she told me that she was a remote worker and she was feeling very excluded. And this is what was happening. She worked remote 90% of the times. And when she went into the office, she would always get these comments, "What are you doing here?" And so she started to become self conscious about being in the office and that she wasn't welcome there. And I said to her, "I'm sure that, have you said anything?" So people don't know all the time that they are making you feel excluded. And so the onus is on both. It's on the person to sort of check themselves that, hey, this message could be making this person feel unwelcomed and unwanted in our company. And hey, person who's feeling this way, I need to let them know that they are making me feel unwelcomed and unwanted. But sometimes it is tricky based on the culture that has been established in organizations and written and unwritten rules that make it challenging for people to be truthful in these conversations. But I would say to you that as individuals, we can all check our language and how exclusive we can be with our language. So that's an opportunity. Be more inclusive of your language. And even I go back to LinkedIn or social media. That is an opportunity when you're posting content and you think it's fun socially. You have to check yourself and filter, sense check if you are using language that is exclusive. Also, I talked about recruitment materials. So there are some opportunities around using the right software to remove bias from the hiring process. So that is also an opportunity. I would like you to bet on talent. One of my students was telling me she got a huge promotion at her job, and she was so happy that they had so much confidence in her and that they were willing to, she didn't have all the qualifications, but her boss believed in her, so she got the opportunity. And I said to her, "Well, how are you going to pay that forward?" And she said, "I don't know." So we had a conversation about that. I said, "You could actually give someone else that opportunity. In your new role, you can give someone that opportunity to bet on them." I suggest to you, as part of the inclusive leadership journey, you're going to have to bet on talent. You are not always going to be okay with the person sitting in front of you, but it doesn't mean that they can't do the job and that they can't do the job well. And so some of it is our baggage, our language, our lived experiences, et cetera, that prevent us from being able to dance with this person. So there are opportunities to leverage software. One of the softwares I'd like to mention is Textio, which allows you to check your job descriptions, checked for gender discrepancies. Is your language more focused on attracting men and you're excluding women by the language that you're using? Sometimes there's bias around names on resumes, and if someone puts down their name and you can glean who it is, there may be some unconscious bias around whether this person moves forward or not. Also, bet on your ERGs or your affinity groups. Allow them to be at the table in the conversation to bring a different perspective in. Allow them to be a incubator, if you will, for talent, where you can recruit or consider them in succession planning. This is a huge opportunity that is overlooked. And so this is one of the things I want to encourage you to do, is to bet on your talent. The next thing, I can talk about walking the talk for days. That is one of the things that I am passionate about, and that is organizations walking the talk on the inclusion journey. Walk the talk where words meet actions. They line up and you are authentically walking the talk. Some examples of this is Ben & Jerry's. They have been on this inclusion journey for a while and have taken a stance on racial equity, also around the gay and lesbian lesbian, LGBT space. They've taken a stand. They've taken a stand on many things. And if you go on their website and you look at their mission and you look at what they stand for, that is an opportunity area. So I'm encouraging you, not just from an organization, association, college level, but also from an individual level, that you can walk the talk. And it just means don't be one way in a meeting and then be in the elevator and be and make someone feel less than. Walk the talk on this journey. Some organizations have pledged to the CEO Action Committee, and that has allowed it to start from the top, where the CEO is saying, we believe in creating more inclusive workplaces, and I'm going to sign on the dot and I'm going to take action to make sure this happens in my organization. Leverage technology. I talked about Textio before, but there are other technologies like Pymetrics, which offers artificial intelligence to help you to remove bias from your hiring process. So look up this organization and what they can do. There are many more organizations. Have a conversation with your chief technology officer or with your information technology team about what technologies can we as an organization leverage to create more inclusive space. It's not just about HR and what they're doing. It's not just about the ERGs. It's a lot more than that. So I have very quickly touched on what I could in 1 hour on best practices. Again, make sure that you provide continuous learning opportunities. Also, take advantage of learning and listening. Take advantage of those internal focus groups. Be sure to consider vendor diversity or supplier diversity. Benchmark from different surveys, but make sure you understand that everybody is going to bumble and stumble. Check your language and how you're using it. Bet on talent. Organizations like Google create a risk-friendly organization. Encourage your recruiters or your hiring managers to feel like they can bet on talent. Walk the talk and leverage the technology. Let me go over to you, Kristen, to see what questions are coming up in the chat.
Absolutely. And let's all give Simone a nice virtual round of applause. Also, Simone, would you mind sharing the SHRM credit page? There we go. So folks, if you have your phone handy and you want to take a picture of this, or if you want to jot down the activity ID, you can, in order for you to receive your SHRM credits. Simone, we're getting some questions. Would it be okay if we shared your slides as a PDF form?
Yeah, I can create a handout. Let me just create a simplified handout of that, so we can do that afterwards.
Sure. So we will definitely provide that information for all of you. I also want to thank Vector Marketing, because Vector sponsored this presentation today. So I am very glad that they were able to continue to be an active part and sponsor of our presentations. So what we're going to do now is, yes, turn it over to Simone for questions. Simone, if you want, you can stop sharing your screen, and then that way they'll get to see you. There you go. So we have 2 questions so far. The first one is, how do you confidently seek leadership opportunities if when you become a leader, you will be leading a team that predominantly will not look like you?
Repeat the first part of the question for me, please.
Sure. How do you confidently seek leadership opportunities if when you become a leader, you'll be leading a team that predominantly will not look like you?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, that is the world that we live in right now. It's going to take some time to see a shift where there's a more diverse slate of people. If you think about things like board diversity, there's not a lot of diversity. There are fewer organizations that have board diversity. So you just have to move forward despite what it looks like, and look at yourself, change your perspective. Change your perspective to see yourself as a game changer, as someone who is going to change the landscape. And you can change that by doing some volunteering. Volunteer for boards, associations, and build up that skill. Build up your confidence level. I'm going to go off the beaten path here and say, if you're not good at public speaking, leverage Toastmasters to build up your public speaking. And when you go to Toastmasters, do the table topics so that you're speaking off the cuff and can flex your style. I found that to be the most beneficial. So it sounds like you need to build up your confidence so that you can be in the room and confidently sit at the table and bring others along. So build up your confidence and know that you can change the landscape.
Great. All right, we have another question that says, could Textio be used to review general career resources, or is it specifically for recruitment materials like job descriptions?
I think that is a good question for Textio. The first thing I would suggest you do is get a demo of Textio and understand their roadmap for improvements on the platform. I'm not a Textio expert, so I can speak at a very high level. And so I think your next step would be to go on the Textio website and schedule a demo where you can ask their salesperson specifically the questions that you have that are targeted to your industry.
Great. We have another question. How do you find your voice to challenge your employer to be more inclusive when your position is low on the ladder?
Woo woo! Join my inclusion bootcamp course. I skipped that slide. Go to the inclusionbootcamp.com. I have a course that's 6 weeks that talks about how to build up your inclusive leadership muscles. So I'm glad you're asking that question. The fact that you're asking that question means that you want to challenge your employer. Now is the best time to do it with everything that is going on in the world. The leaders are listening. They have to, because externally, customers, other employees are wanting to see them walking the talk. So I think you can approach it from a curiosity standpoint. Hey, I am really concerned about what's happening externally in the world. It is impacting me as how I show up to the organization. I would love to understand what our organization is doing and what our roadmap is for creating a more inclusive culture, period. That's it. Stop talking, start listening.
Great. Next question. Let's see. Well, we don't currently have any more at this moment. I will give folks another minute if they want to put in a question, and then if not, we'll wrap up. But I know Simone is so passionate about this, and my gosh, you gave me such great tidbits to take back to my own office. So thank you. Are there any other questions, folks, for Simone today?
Let me just shout out Michelle. Hey, Michelle Guzik. Thank you for already connecting with me on LinkedIn. I just saw it pop up on my phone. So thank you for being here. And so for any of you who want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. My website is SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org, or you can find me on the inclusionbootcamp.com. That course has 6 HRC credits. I love talking about this stuff, so I am always going to be talking about this. I encourage you to keep talking about it as well.
Well, we did get one more question. Can you tell some growing pains you had yourself as an inclusive leader?
Oh my gosh. You know what? As an individual, I have it sometimes at home with my fiance in conversation. I am constantly challenged with it. And in terms of listening and knowing what I teach, he'll use my language and what I teach against me. You're not being inclusive, and I unintentionally let him feel excluded sometimes with the work that I'm doing. I'm so passionate about it. I don't intend to, but it consumes me. And he doesn't always have a full view of the work that I'm doing. So he reminds me that I'm not being inclusive. And I'm going to tell you a story about me going to the nail salon. Remember, I talked about what we've been taught. I went to the nail salon and there was a guy who was the next person that was going to do nails. And I was like, oh my God, I hope I don't get him. I hope I don't get him. I want the other lady to do my nail, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. And of course I got the guy. Now, there is nothing that says to me that he can't do a good job. I should trust that they have hired him because he can, in fact, do a good pedicure. But I wanted a woman to do my pedicure. And so I had to get over it. And so I sat there with discomfort. But guess what? He did such a great job that from now on, I always look for him. So it's just, it's simple things where we don't realize that we are doing it. But based on what we've learned, based on what we see, what we think, our life experiences, we make these snap decisions that signal exclusion, and we can do a better job.
Great. Next question. How do you get your colleague and organization to embrace various cultures, from hair texture to traditional clothing from other cultures?
Wow, that is a good question. Use the time now. Use data. I am a data person. Don't do the selling yourself. Here's a couple of data points that you can use. Find surveys and content from reputable places to bring into the organization. Hey, I just saw this article in Time Magazine, and it's talking about hair texture and cases that have happened around it. Use that language. Use influencers that you believe your organization will respect to sell it for you. And look for people in organizations who are influential, and you don't always have to sell it in. You look for someone who is influential that's going to influence leadership, and then you strategically get them on board and leverage them as a sponsor to sell it in for you. You don't have to do the uphill battle of saying, hey, I'm Black, my hair is different. Why aren't we allowing this in our environment? So you start by sharing data. This is what I'm hearing. Here's information that I think the organization would be interested in. You look for people who are influential and who are listened to, and you start to build a relationship with them, and you start to tell them and share your story and your data. And then you make the ask when you're comfortable. I need your help. For me to feel included at this organization, here's what I need. I wonder if you can take this up to the leadership level. I'm happy to support you with more data. If you know that they're not going to listen to you, be strategic about it and how you go about it.
All right. And one more question before we wrap up. How can affinity groups support the larger body organization without them being tokenized? Tips for collective work.
Okay. Kristen, there's 1 minute left.
I know.
That is a big question for 1 minute. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Understand that I actually am a product of the ERG space. I led an ERG for about 4 years. My background was IT, and I got connected to diversity and inclusion through ERG. And so I led a group, and I was in charge of 7 ERGs and advisory council. So I can't answer that in 1 minute. Please connect with me externally, because I wouldn't answer it properly, and you would feel dissatisfied if I just rambled off. It's not enough. It's too big of a question for the 1 minute. I'm sorry.
But a great question. And I mean, we do have some more in here. So folks, please connect with Simone. Your questions show how important this topic is to you and the role that it plays in your day-to-day life. So definitely make use of the expertise of Simone. So as we wrap up here, I want to thank Simone again for her wisdom and her responses to your questions. I want to thank Vector Marketing. And last but not least, 2:15 is the next breakout session. So give yourself a little stretch break, and then we'll meet you all back for the next session. Thanks, everyone, and I hope you're enjoying the conference.
Thank you, Kristen, for doing a marvelous job, for keeping me sane, keeping the chat sane. You rock. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.